Of course, hindsight is always 2020, and you can look back at events and see, this is where it started. If there was the beginning of the end for the Pertwee era, it was the Green Death, and this is really kind of the signs of the end of that whole of structure of Doctor Who that they had established at the time with Unit and all that. And it's also, of course, very notable as it is the goodbye episode for Joe Grant, who, for all intents and purposes, is really the quintessential companion for the Pertwee Doctor. You know, whereas Jamie would have been the quintessential companion for Troughton, it was Joe Grant here, even though, of course, he had Liz Shaw, and then eventually Sarah Jane Smith is introduced on his watch. But really, Joe Grant is pretty much the ideal companion for this version of the Doctor, and they worked very well together. Even though, of course, the Doctor himself was vehemently against this when she showed, because he appreciated the skills and knowledge and abilities of Liz Shaw with her scientific background and everything. But really, for a character like Liz Shaw, is like, well, I'm not really cut out to be the assistant here because she's got her own knowledge, but of course she's really nothing compared to the knowledge that, the Doctor would have, this advanced civilization he comes from and all that sort of thing. But still, so she moved on, and then here came Jo, who really is just, well, she's there to hand the tools and stuff to the Doctor when he needs, and she was a comical figure. And it worked really well in a lot of ways. And, of course, it didn't take long before the Doctor began to really care for her and looked out for her and all that, which gives the most pivotal and memorable scene from this adventure, if you will, because the rest of it is kind of, it's another Unit adventure. The Doctor goes up against giant maggots. Yes, giant maggots. No, they're not green. The green is actually the other and probably the real villain, which also speaks to whenever I, these days with the overt and just blatant lecturing of politics in Doctor Who today, and everyone says, well, it was always political. Well, for the most part, not really. Nothing like this. But the Pertwee Doctor, sometimes, yes, there was definite some political messaging in it, and most certainly with this episode having to do with the environment and the environmental message coming out, which, of course, promises all these great wonders of alternative power sources and whatnot, and boy, still hasn't really manifested, not to the point to replace the fossil fuel power capacity with the exception of nuclear, that's not the one Professor Jones here wants you to go with. So, of course, the hippies are the good guys and the corporate guy is terrible. But in the end, the corporate guy is a stooge for another big threat, which is, AI, if you will, where the mysterious villain behind the scenes or behind the curtain, you pull the curtain back and there's no one there because it's just the computer named Boss. And I'm not sure, but I think the voice, and I'm sorry I'm forgetting the guy's name, but the voice for Boss sounds very much like the same Boss that played Deep Thought in the Hitchhiker's Guide, a television, series or miniseries rather. So I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on that, but he did sound very similar. They're both talking computers. But anyway, of course, Boss. And it gets a bit silly because Boss is all too human and he's power mad and all this sort of thing, where at the same time criticizing humanity, and yet, well, it's pretty much you, buddy. So anyway, so that's what you got, and you've got your basically classic sci-fi monster story where these maggots are mutated by the illegal disposal of waste in this mine. Of course, it's infected the workers, and now they're not turning into the Hulk, but they are turning green, and they die. And meanwhile, there's these nasty maggots that are coming out of the ground. The Brigadier's solution is to blow it all up. Well, that just drives them to the surface, and oh no, and then eventually, remember, maggots are larvae for flies. So what happens when they, yes, that's right. You only get one, that's too bad. If they had the budget, boy, you could have a whole, flock of giant flies flying. That'd have been cool. Maybe they could well, okay, they're not going to no, never mind. But anyway, so that, of course, the doctor figures it out. You've got a little bit of undercover work from Captain Yates and whatnot, and so on and so forth. And that's all well and good. Meanwhile, you have this blossoming romance because everybody falls in love with Joe, and this time the guy really wins over, even though some of the other suitors were a bit more impressive than this guy, I thought. and it is some of interest where people say, hey, there was never really any romance in Doctor Who, certainly not with the Doctor and his companion, but it always seemed to be implied or insinuated, or it's just on, within the viewer. If you decide it's there, then it is. If you don't like it, then it's not. But here, Joe just openly says, well, this guy kind of reminds me of an younger version of the Doctor. And he's, he's young and everything, but he's an eccentric scientist and whatnot. Not that great of an actor, but what are you going to do? And so, so therein lies her affections for the man, and she falls in love with him too. So in the end, she decides she's going to marry the man. Well, he proposes to her in his own eccentric, absent-minded manner, and they're going to run off together to save the world by developing a fungus that you can replace meat products with. They said it was good, but but it ended up, the fungus, everybody enjoyed the fungus. Even Brigadier enjoyed the meals made by fungus, but the maggots didn't. No, it killed them. So, if it's that toxic for the maggots, I don't know. How many meals of this stuff can you eat before, yeah. The message was pretty silly, but nevertheless, that's what's there. But ultimately, what makes the show powerfully significant is it also sets up for the ultimate end for the Pertwee Doctor, where he does finally make it to Metropolis, and he gets the blue sapphire, and that becomes significant later. And it shows, you don't get to see it all, but it's a horrible place, and there's monsters and something's there, and then it says that why the Doctor is kind of terrified to go back. He thought it was going to be this cool vacation spot, and no, not quite. So that's significant, but more importantly is this is probably one of the most touching and heartbreaking goodbye scenes for a Doctor and his companion. And it's done in the perfect way in that it's very subtle. It's rather quiet, and both characters are aware of what's happening. And the Doctor is very sad and a bit heartbroken, and his companion's leaving him, and that's that, and he's got to move on. And once again, to the realization that he's a very lonely man. And once again, he's off on his own. There will be other companions, of course, because he's very lonely and needy of companionship, and that's the only way to get to explain this. I mean, other times you would think he would say, "No, I can't bring people with me on this; it's too dangerous." But he can't help himself; he's very lonely, and he needs his companions. And here, where Joe is moving on, she's met someone, he's contemporary age and what have you. And that's, what she's doing, but it's still very sad. She looks back and, because they have this little celebratory dinner at the Nut Hutch. That's what Professor Jones called his place, okay, whatever. And they're celebrating, they're being engaged, and Brigadier's happy, and everybody's celebrating and all that. But the Doctor, he's not into it, and he just quietly, exits. And Joe is aware of this, and it's all very, very, very sad. And, of course, he drives off in Bessie, off into the sunset, and there you go. That's the end of the show. Very quiet and a beautiful scene from a show that was, Attack of the Maggots. But it works. It's very powerful, and it's very, very good. And they should be proud of their achievement here. And it is, there's a lot of different, of course, there's the death of Adric and stuff like that. but this one is just so well done and so very powerfully done in that very simple, very quiet scene. And a lot of times proving the sentiment that less can be more. And it certainly does that. So for that alone, it's a really one scene. It really elevates the overall story, which would have been this kind of silly monster story. But what are you going to do? You know, it fits in with the whole unit mission and what have you. And that's all well and good. But yeah, do treat yourself to The Green Death and prepare yourself for a very, very heartbreaking scene as the Doctor has to part ways with a beloved companion. All right, thank you for watching and listening. Say, why not like and subscribe, and check out that link description below. That'll take you to my mini stores that have plenty of goodies for you. Yes, t-shirts, stickers, posters, cups, pins, whatever, hats, all that good stuff at several different stores you can go to and peruse and find what you may or may not want. And you can also check out the Night Knight comic book based on my Night Knight audio plays. But here you can see Night Knight in brilliant color within the pages of his comic book. So head over to indieplanet.com and get your copy of Night Knight today. You can also find my podcast over at radiomisfits.com and enjoy there, where on occasion there's brand new episodes of Night Knight, so you can check that out too. And of course you can also watch my videos over at BitChute, the Mr. Nailsin channel on bitchute.com.